Good evening. Thanks for coming out. My name is Paul Tomlinson. I am a psychologist by training and currently Vice President for Research and Quality Assurance at Burrell Behavioral Health, and perhaps more importantly tonight, Vice Chair of the Board of Directors for Community Partnership. And very happy to be here to moderate this community forum on marijuana. Now the bottom line is, the purpose for this evening, why we're here, why folks went to the trouble to put on this event, is that, in fact, there's an awful lot of misinformation. There's a lot of half-truths about marijuana, its effects, its long-term effects. A lot of it promulgated by people that should know better, in my opinion. But nonetheless, what this evening is about really is hopefully to raise awareness, certainly in the community, about the facts regarding marijuana and its long-term use and so forth. So that's kind of where we're headed, and we have a really wonderful and distinguished panel of folks who can speak directly to this issue here tonight, and we're going to get to them in a minute. But we're going to have a chance for you to weigh in with questions, and hopefully we'll make this a lively evening of discussion and learning and awareness raising. So I'd like to recognize a couple of key folks in the audience here tonight. Is Chuck Doherty here? Chuck Doherty's here. He is Executive Director of ACT Missouri and Jeff City Statewide Resource Center for Prevention in Missouri. Thanks for being here, sir. We have Springfield City Councilman Doug Burleson. Is he here somewhere, maybe? Thanks, Doug. Thanks for coming. And from the Greene County Prosecutor's Office, Dan Patterson. And lots of other VIPs and important folks too, Ed Durr, and lots that I won't take time to mention all of you. But thank you all for coming. Appreciate your attendance, bringing your expertise and perspective to the event tonight. So here's the thing. The way this thing is going to proceed is that we're going to have, as I said, this panel is going to come and each deliver remarks in the range from 6 to 8 minutes. And you know, I ain't scared. I will take some people out if they mess with me too much, except the guy who's packing heat. So we're going to have some remarks from each of the panelists, and we're going to have a keynote address to close that. But we're also going to have an opportunity for you all to, on 3x5 note cards that are provided to you. More cards will be available if the questions get really out of hand. But we're going to have a chance for you to write down your questions. And following each of the speakers, as I understand it, Chris, they're going to be collected. Folks will be coming up and down the rows collecting those. So keep your questions fresh in your mind. After the keynote, we will take a few minutes break to sort of gather our thoughts, sort through hopefully the onslaught of questions, and prepare them for me, and I will then sort of deliver them in some priority order, the questions that you've asked. It may not be possible to respond to all questions, certainly. It's a pretty good sized turnout, for which we're grateful. But we'll try to get to as many as possible. All right? So, having said that, we're going to have folks in this order coming up. Let me just introduce the entire panel very quickly. Major Kirk Manlove from Springfield Police Department, from Brad Shelton from Greene County Juvenile Office, Jean Graybeal and Julie Steiger. Is Julie going to be joining as well?
Yes.
Yes, tag team from Springfield Public Schools, and my compadre from Burrell, John Birch, who runs our C-Star program, and our keynote speaker, Ron Griffin. So, without further ado, we'll begin with Major Kirk Manlove, who has been with the Springfield Police Department for almost 20 years. He's currently the commander of Investigation and Support Services and has significant narcotics enforcement experience. Major?
I want to thank the community partnership of the Ozarks for inviting the police department to participate in tonight's forum. Chief Williams had another engagement tonight, so I hope not to disappoint those who wanted to speak to him, but I'll do my best to answer your questions or address concerns. Drug usage can be a very broad field of discussion, and a discussion about marijuana can also be very broad. So I want to keep my comments fairly narrow in keeping with the forum. And I'll try to focus upon the impact marijuana can have on our youth and the community overall. I've been with the department for 19 years. I will not pretend to be a marijuana expert or have all the answers to every question. I do think I can offer some expertise with regard to our agency's experience with users and traffickers of marijuana. So I can share with you our perspective as your police department and some of our observations as to our drug situation in Springfield. I'd also like to tell you about our approach to drug enforcement and our enforcement philosophy. Of my 19 years in our agency, I spent 6 of them in our narcotics enforcement unit, 4.5 of which were undercover and the rest as a supervisor. More than I would care to, I've sat in many houses and apartments of drug users and dealers, watching them use drugs, marijuana in particular, where its use was prevalent, and watching them smoke many times in front of their children. After an investigation, we would often learn these individuals suffered heavy addictions to marijuana, an addiction they could ill afford from not only a health perspective, but financially as well. They often were unemployed, much in part because of their addiction, and money needed for food, rent, or utilities were used to buy marijuana or other drugs. As I moved from case to case, I often wondered what becomes of those children in terms of their future drug usage and how their lives were impacted. I've had the opportunity of interviewing hundreds of users and dealers. I've had the opportunity, and I need to point out that they're one and the same. Not always, but often. I would occasionally come across a marijuana user or dealer that never used other drugs. But for those using other drugs, methamphetamine or cocaine, the vast majority of the time they had been users of marijuana at a very young age. Often introduced to them as they observed their parents smoking and then becoming continuous users of the drug. This observation seems to be supported in studies noted by the AMA that those who smoke marijuana would be 4 times likely to use cocaine and 5 times more likely to use hallucinogens. I definitely interviewed many people who admitted they were strongly addicted to marijuana. These individuals often appeared apathetic, not very motivated. Those who managed to stay in school, whether college or high school, were making poor grades or not performing very well. I was disappointed to learn that marijuana usage among our youth has gone up again in 2011, especially after having experienced no increase from 04 to 07 and then climbing again in 2009. In 2011, 2.6 million persons aged 12 or older had used marijuana for the first time within the past 12 months, 57.7% younger than 18. We also see the impact of marijuana usage in our driving public at the police department. The use of marijuana definitely impacts motor skills, causing a physical impairment of drivers. Of our approximately over 1,000 DWI drivers last year, about 12% of those were impaired by drugs. Of our drug-impaired drivers, 65% are impaired by marijuana. In over 75% of our drug-impaired drivers, marijuana is a secondary detected drug in combinations with alcohol, depressants, or stimulants. It affects the body 2 to 3 hours after ingestion. However, impairment can last up to 24 hours without the user being aware of the effects. It slows reaction times, depth perception, and reduces the driver's ability to devote sufficient attention to driving. It's important to point out that with improved cultivation techniques and technology, the THC levels now are not what they were in the 60s and 70s. In 1983, the average THC level was under 4%. It's 10.1% now, with some varieties going to 15 to 20. I'd like to take a few minutes to describe our drug enforcement efforts at our department. As with any drug, we focus our attention at the distribution and the trafficking level. We do not target users. It does not mean we don't come across users in our investigation, nor does it mean they are not charged with possession. But it is more often a result of a traffic stop or during the investigation of other crimes that we come across individuals holding a small amount of drugs, and this of course includes marijuana. Our agency seized 76 pounds of marijuana in 2011. The local DEA office, of which we have detectives attached as part of the local drug task force, and in conjunction with area agencies such as the Highway Patrol, seized 3,800 pounds in 2011 along I-44, and 1,700 pounds so far this year. The majority of that marijuana is smuggled from Mexico by the drug cartels. Tonight, I would like to dispel a myth I commonly hear, and that is that our jails and prisons are full of people who are convicted with just user amounts of marijuana. It's simply not the case. Our arrest policy and our agreement with our county jail directs our officers issue a ticket and release for misdemeanor marijuana possession, unless there are other factors at play. For example, the identification of the person cannot be established, so fingerprints must be taken, at which point they're booked into the jail for photographs and prints, then released. Or they may have an arrest warrant, or the person presents a threat to someone, for example. We recently reviewed 12 months of arrest data for our agency, and we found we had booked no one on probable cause only for misdemeanor possession of marijuana. We did make 137 arrests with city warrants issued by a judge for misdemeanor possession of marijuana. These are often issued because someone did not follow through with a plea or a judge's directive. At the state level, the Bureau of Justice statistics show that only 1.6% of the inmate population were convicted of a marijuana-only crime, including trafficking, with only 0.7% in prison for a marijuana possession-only crime. Many of these may have been initially charged with more serious crimes, but were able to negotiate reduced charges or lighter sentences through plea agreements. These also might include those individuals who are career criminals with multiple felony convictions. In closing, I can tell you that I believe our agency and local justice system has shifted in what I think in a positive way in the past 20 or more years. Law enforcement and the justice system with regard to drug enforcement has always been a three-pronged approach, with enforcement, education, and treatment. Oftentimes, some agencies and justice systems will be heavier or lighter on some of those areas. I do think we are a bit more balanced than in the past, with more emphasis on treatment, on the treatment end than before. Greene County's drug court, for example, has a good success since its inception over 6 or 7 years ago. I also think investigators have a better understanding of addiction, how a treatment referral instead might be a better avenue and offers perhaps a more long-term approach to crime reduction than a temporary trip to jail, only to have someone get out and continue with their addiction. Again, I'm just scratching the surface here. These are just a few of our observations and what we experience and see as an agency in Southwest Missouri. Thank you.
Thank you, Major. So we're going to do a collection now. If you have questions on those 3x5s. All right. And next up we have the hardest working man in juvenile justice. He's been with the office for 22 years. Born and raised in Springfield, deputy juvenile officer and supervisor. My friend Brad Shelton.
Thank you, Paul. I just wanted to kind of go through just a few things on what we do at the juvenile office when we get one of these referrals. Early intervention is an important key. When we get a referral, we'll set up an intake conference with the parent and youth. We evaluate the case looking at evidence and other multiple factors. We administer a risk needs assessment and on the youth to determine what level of intervention should be considered. Accountability for actions is definitely part of the consideration for disposition. A C-STAR assessment also is done to look at what kind of drug or alcohol dependency issues we have and how we need to handle that. Once we gather all this information in, we kind of make a decision in regards to how we're going to handle the case. There's two ways we can go with the case. We can either go informally or formally. We try to utilize all informal options if possible before we even look at going to court. We have a great probation services department that work with these kids and have a lot of resources in the community that we can direct these kids to, and that's what we try to do without going to court if we can. If it requires a formal petition, we will file it and take a juvenile to court. And even at that point in time, we're working in the interest of the kid and the family. And we have some great services through our formal probation department, which include a new program which is called RADAR, Responding Appropriately to Drug and Alcohol Referrals. This is the name of the current program that supervises former youth while on probation for any offense that is drug-related in issue. I pulled a statistic from our detention facility, which I think is really interesting, and I want to share with you tonight. If we detain a youth in our detention facility for any offense, and that could be assault, burglary, drug offense, or any offense whatsoever, we are usually looking at formal court action. But what our detention facility is reporting to us on an average of kids admitted into detention, they're seeing 40 to 50% of those kids admitted into detention testing positive for THC. That kind of shows you the issue in regards to marijuana use and getting into some serious trouble. Finally, in my years of experience working with youth and families, referred to our office, and I've been there a long time. And this is not rocket science. It's pretty simple, and I try to put it out to the parent and the youth that I work with. I can state without doubt, marijuana and drug use, in simple terms, is not healthy. It leads to negative consequences. It leads to dangerous situations with your friends. It leads to family problems. It leads to peer problems, education problems, and legal problems. And that's a fact. I've been there 22 years, and I can tell you without a doubt that marijuana and drug use is just horrible, and it can be horrific for kids. Finally, one thing I do tell the kids and the parents when they come to my office, we're there to try to work with them and work in their interests, but the issue that comes to mind is if they can't get it under control and get this activity under control, when they turn 17, if they go out and get arrested, they will have an adult criminal record for the rest of their life. And it doesn't matter if they are adjudicated on that, it will show up as an arrest. And whenever we do background checks on people that are coming to work at our office, I will see that. There'll be an arrest, and a person that's applying for a job that doesn't have that arrest on their record is going to have a better shot at doing something positive and getting a good job in the future. So in closing, I just want to make sure everybody knows that tackling these issues before adulthood with early and appropriate intervention is absolutely a key and a must.
Thank you, sir. He ought to know. Next up, we have a team. Jean Graybill, who's been coordinator of health services for Springfield Public Schools for the past 22 years. 22 years seems to be a theme tonight. There's 3 of you. She's a registered nurse with a master's in health education, was recently inducted as a national fellow in school nursing. Jean has 2 grown children, one a graduate from Kickapoo High School. And helping her out is going to be Dr. Julie Steiger, Springfield Public Schools, Director of Operations for Secondary Schools, a former high school math teacher, middle school counselor, middle school and high school assistant principal, and principal. Ladies?
Thank you. Well, good evening. Well, I'm in a unique position this evening because I get to share with Julie, and Julie is our secondary operations director. So I'm going to talk a few minutes about prevention and early intervention with our students, and then Julie's going to talk on the side of our policy as it relates to our discipline policy, participation in extracurricular activities, and the potential consequences related to college and career planning. So, the old adage, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, and that is still very relevant today. So we begin very early in our health curriculum in talking with our kindergartners, for instance, on good substances and bad substances, what is safe and what is unsafe substances that can be taken into the body. In the middle school, for example, in the 6th grade, the curriculum covers application of major steps in decision-making to a scenario where a student has to best describe how they would do resistance to drug use. Students also have to investigate the impact of drug use and the ability to make sound judgments. In the 9th grade curriculum, students have to identify and assess the effects of drug use, misuse, and abuse on major life areas, including short and long-term effects of various drug uses, how peer pressure and media pressure influence drug-taking behavior, and who you can turn to for help if you have a problem with an illegal substance use and abuse, for instance, marijuana. So for an example, in Springfield Public Schools, if a student discloses to the school counselor or another staff member that they're using an illegal substance, or they're concerned about a drug or alcohol use, the student can be referred for an initial screening to determine whether or not there's inpatient or outpatient substance abuse counseling, which may be appropriate for them. So all of those requests, or even for mental health screening at this point for middle school and high school students, We have a relationship or an agreement with Borough Behavioral Health Center at this point between us and the Springfield Public Schools and Borough Behavioral Health. So they can be referred for screening by an administrator, a counselor, or even you as a parent. So if you have concerns about what's going on with your student, don't hesitate to contact the school counselor. Have a discussion with them, or if you have a relationship with one of their teachers or an administrator, don't wait until too late to have a discussion with them. If you're seeing signs and symptoms of things that are not going well within the home, then talk to the school about that. So then the student assistance team or the teacher support team can also take in referrals from other teachers if they've noticed changes in behavior of the student within the classroom. They've changed friends, absences, chronic absences from school, or they're tardy. They seem to be sleeping in class, or their behavior again has changed. So then those screenings are free for any student that is under the age of 18. If they're over the age of 18 and over, then there's another process that has to take place. And that goes through our coordinator of counseling, which is Rhonda Mammon. So if you have any questions or concerns about that, then certainly she is the person to go to for that. So if there's any request for screening, the principal or the counselor can make recommendations to the parent, and screening takes place only with parental consent. And the parent is supposed to be involved with that screening. So then a contact is made to Rhonda Mammon, and then from there, then it goes on and she makes the appointment for that screening to take place, and parents are involved. It can be taken place at the school site, but most typically it's done off-site as well. So in essence, it's a team approach for us. It's not only the school district that talks about prevention, it's up to parents, it's up to the community, it's up to students. We try to build essential steps for the students in order to be able to create a healthy lifestyle for them, but it also takes the community support. And isn't that wonderful that as many of you that came out this evening to become better informed about this urgent concern that we have for our youth. We all want our youth to be successful, and you're part of the solution as well. So that's my answer, prevention. So next, Julie is going to speak about our discipline policy and the potential impact for future and consequences for substance abuse and use.
First, I'd like to give some good news. Our drug and alcohol suspensions, we don't differentiate between what student is being suspended for. It all falls under drug and alcohol, so I cannot speak to how many of these are specifically for marijuana. But since 2007, our suspensions have gone down each year. We had one year they peaked up about by 10. But in 2006, 2007, which is when our current system started keeping the data, we were 296 students in the entire district being suspended for drug or alcohol use or distribution. And last year we were down to 197. And I think that's really good. When you think we're a school district of about 25,000 students, our numbers are way down, and I think a lot of it has to do with all the different things we've put in place to help students before it becomes a real problem. And with the discipline, we are a zero tolerance school district. Distribution is a safe schools violation. We run by Missouri statute with how we make our policies. When a student has the first offense for possession, they are assigned a 10-day out-of-school suspension, which may be reduced to 7 days if they and their parent elect to go through the assessment that Jean talked about that is run through C-STAR. Out of our 197 suspensions last year, 53%, 109 of those students did choose to do the assessment to have their suspension reduced to 7 days. We want kids in school. They don't learn when they're not in school. They're not learning, they're not going to be graduates, and our graduation rate continues to go up every year, which is another good thing to hear about. On sale and distribution, on the first offense, that's a maximum 10-day out-of-school suspension that would not be reduced with the assessment. So with that, they can still do the assessment, that is still available to them, but it's a mandatory 10-day out-of-school suspension. When we talk about second offenses for possession or use, that does go up also to the 10-day out-of-school suspension. and the recommendation for a review meeting. We have review officers who are retired principals who will come in and sit and listen to the circumstances and decide if they will go beyond the 10 days, because by state law, the superintendent cannot suspend somebody for more than 10 days without having that review meeting. One of the things that is a real big concern is extracurricular activities. Our students do sign a citizenship agreement. They are representing the school, they are representing the activity they are participating in, so they are held to a little bit higher standard. If they have a drug or alcohol violation, they would have a 28-day athletic suspension from that participation. So, in the high schools and in the middle schools, while they are on the out-of-school suspension, they may not participate in that activity at all. When they are back in school, even though they still have that 28-day window where they are supposed to be excluded from participation, they may not participate in games or speech and debate or whatever. They may participate in the practices if the coaches choose to let them do so. They also may sit on the bench or attend if the coach decides that they may do that, or the sponsor decides they may do that. The final point that we were asked about was college admissions and scholarships, and I did call one of our high school counselors and I said, okay, just be blunt with me, very honest. If a student has a drug or alcohol suspension, or if they have something that has been sent over to juvenile, because we do school police reports whenever these happen, what's the likelihood that that college will process that application? And she said pretty much what I thought. Some of the schools that have very strict policies, they won't even look at it. Other schools, they will want to talk to that student and see what the circumstances are. There's not a blanket answer for that, so it does vary. And like Brad said, though, when students over 17, the costs are a lot higher in terms of that. In terms of federal aid, I just went to a very good workshop in Indianapolis on FAFSA, which is financial aid for students. This is all sponsored by Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. There's no taxpayers on getting this program going, but it's to help students hook up with the money they can access to go to college, because a lot of students do not know how much money is available out there for them. So this whole program is to help kids go to college. So when you're talking about federal funding for scholarships, some federal grants do have rubrics that they will look at. And with the first offense in which a student is charged, they could look at not being eligible for the scholarship money for a year. Second offense, it could be 2 years from the time that they had that infraction to where they would be eligible. And on the third infraction, they may not be eligible at all. That is not necessarily for every grant that is out there, but that is kind of the general rule for scholarships. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean and Julie. Okay, I forgot last time, so we're going to make sure we come through and pick up the 3x5s. If you have questions, please write on those cards and get them to the folks who are collecting them. That's what's going to make this fun. The last panelist before the keynote is my friend John Birch, who's been with Burrell Behavioral Health for 7 years. He's a director of our adolescent substance abuse treatment program. He's a licensed clinical social worker who's been in counseling and social services for 20 years, not 22, but just 20. So, John.
I'm going to state a few facts about marijuana use, and then I'm going to describe a little bit about our program and what we see in our program. As Paul described, I'm the director of the adolescent substance abuse program and the C-STAR that Jean referred to. Marijuana use, especially among youth, has many health hazards. Studies indicate that continued use as an adolescent can drop a person's IQ by as many as 8 points. There are also studies that indicate for males it can double the chances for testicular cancer. Marijuana use can double the chance of having a car accident. Marijuana use, teens who smoke 3 or more times a week are 3 times more likely than non-users to have thoughts about committing suicide. Marijuana is addictive, and heavy users develop withdrawal symptoms and tolerance issues just like those with other drug addictions. Teens can become addicted in as little as 6 months. The majority of youth entering drug treatment reported primary drug use of marijuana. The national figures of current marijuana use is about 8% of those 12 through age 17. In our adolescent substance abuse program, the drug that is abused the most is marijuana. Of the 275 clients we saw in treatment this past year, 90% reported marijuana use. Some other facts about our program is that most of our clients are male, which is 67%. Of the 275 clients that we saw this past year, 80% reported co-occurring diagnoses. That means depression, anxiety, ADHD. We are also asked very many times about our program, what is your success rate? Given that substance abuse is a long-term relapsing disease, we do expect that some clients will relapse. Last year, at the 3-month follow-up, 52% of the clients reported no use. At the 6-month follow-up, 53% reported not using any drugs. And at the 1-year mark, 58% reported not using. That concludes my point.
Thank you, John. And again, any questions? And I'm sure all these interesting remarks are sparking all kinds of questions in your mind, so make sure you write those down, and the folks will pick them up. All right. Ron Griffin is our keynote speaker this evening. Anybody want to guess how long he's been in substance abuse treatment? Anybody? 22 years, yeah. I don't make this stuff up. It says 22, that's 66 plus 20. It's like 118 years of experience. It's crazy. Ron comes to us with over 22 years of experience in working with individuals, families, and communities in both drug treatment and prevention. He's been a national trainer in drug prevention as well as a drug treatment counselor and program administrator. Currently, Ron is a professor at Longview College in Kansas City and is active in Missouri's fight against marijuana legalization. Welcome, Ron Griffin.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay? Okay, I know you're out there, I can hear you breathing. Could you do me a favor? Could all the young people, all the teenagers and younger, please just stand up for a second. Just humor me for a second. If nothing else, let's get a chance to stretch your legs. There you go. Thank you very much. Look around. I want to say a special thank you to you for coming out here tonight, giving up part of your evening to come listen to this. And I want everybody in the room to look at these people because this is why I'm here tonight. And I hope this is why you're here tonight too. Thank you all very much. Give these guys a round of applause. Let them have a seat. What we are working for and what we are paying attention to and what's important to us is the future that we're going to have, that we're going to hand off to the kids that are in this room that just stood up. And there are things that we can do to make things better and things that we can do to make things worse. Whenever we look at marijuana, and I've been fighting marijuana for 22 years now. As a drug treatment counselor, I still do counseling as a preventionist within the state of Missouri. And one of the things I constantly see are people's perceptions of this drug driving choices which put these young people at further risk. Marijuana is the most misunderstood drug I've ever dealt with, and I've dealt with all of them, from ecstasy to heroin to crack, all the way through. Marijuana is the #1 most misunderstood drug there is out there. If you go to the internet, and where do most young people get their information from? From the internet. And you type in the word marijuana, you're going to get dozens or even thousands, I shouldn't say dozens, thousands upon thousands of pages of information. And most of that information is going to be skewed towards the pro side, towards the positive side. So again, I'm glad to have the young people here tonight. Whenever we look at the information, that positive marijuana information, most of it stems from a group called NORML, the National Organization to Reform Marijuana Laws. They are the impetus, they're the key driving force behind this nationally and even here within the state. And so we hear about things like medicalization of marijuana. We hear about the agricultural reasons and why we shouldn't prosecute marijuana at all because we could save tax dollars. Let's take a second to look at NORML's mission statement. NORML's mission is to move public opinion sufficiently to achieve the repeal of marijuana prohibition so that the responsible use of cannabis by adults is no longer subject to penalty. What did you hear in there? Did you hear medicinal care, palliative care for sick people? Did you hear growing marijuana so that we can use it for rope or fuel or anything like that? No. What did you hear? This is about smoking dope and not getting busted. People that do drugs, help me out with this, people that do drugs do not want to get busted. Am I right? So far, I'm okay. I haven't said anything crazy yet. When we look at all the different ploys that the marijuana industry will use, number one, the thing that they're getting the most mileage of out of it right now is medicinal marijuana. Convincing people that marijuana is good, it's healthy, and I have to say, these guys are doing a great job. When it comes to their mission statement, they are dedicated, and they are working together and doing a great job swaying public opinion. Convincing young people that it's no big deal. One of their lines, the group's name is NORML, one of their lines is it's normal to smoke pot. No, it's not. How many people in here, do you remember, raise your hands with me, how many people remember when we voted on acetaminophen being a medication? None of us do, because we don't vote on what's medication. That's the job of the Institute of Medicine. It's not done by popular vote. But all of a sudden, now we're starting to vote on what we will accept as medication. Does anybody know what classification, I'm not talking schedule, what classification marijuana is? Say it. No, not schedule. What classification? Is it a depressant? Is it a narcotic? Is it a stimulant? Is it a hallucinogen? It's a hallucinogen. And these are things that people don't pay attention to and don't understand. Whenever we look at the other arguments, the agricultural argument, it is not about being able to grow marijuana for hemp, to be able to make grow products. There's no market for it, but there's a huge market for the drug. We hear all the time from the pro-marijuana group that, oh my gosh, if we quit prosecuting marijuana, do you know how much money we would save? Millions and millions of dollars. My answer to that is just because a system isn't working perfectly doesn't mean we just throw it away. If we were to say, you know, if we just took away all the speeding limits, then we wouldn't have so many people getting speeding tickets, and that would make life better for all of us. It just doesn't work that way. Especially when we look, and here's the important part, the long-term ramifications to the community. The long-term ramifications to the people that stood up here just a little bit ago, who we need to help provide clear and healthy beliefs and standards to help them ensure a better life. Whenever we look at the pro-marijuana arguments, one of the things that we'll hear is taxes. I've heard this so often. You know, if we just make it legal and we tax it, then we're going to have money flowing all over the place. We're going to have cash everywhere. Whenever we look at the tax on alcohol and tobacco, do you know where Missouri stands in the 50 states of the tax on alcohol and tobacco? We're number 50. We're at the very bottom. When we look at the, I don't remember the exact numbers. I wasn't planning on talking about this, so don't hold me tight to this. So the rough numbers were like, we bring in, I can't remember, $29 million, but it costs us like $2.5 billion. We don't tax it enough. We don't bring in enough money. If we were to legalize marijuana, we would spend a lot more on the ramifications, the problems created by it, than we would by what we get out of it, just like we do with alcohol and tobacco. Some people will say, forbidden fruit. Have you heard this argument? forbidden fruit. If you make something illegal, then people are just, they're going to want to do it. If you make it illegal, then it's forbidden fruit, and they're going to be driven to go out there and forced to do it. Well, most people, even young people, will live within the parameters of what is legal and acceptable by society standards. There are going to be that fringe element that if you say, hey, don't go stick your tongue on that spark plug, they're just going to have to go over and stick their tongue on it. They're out there. But most people, by and large, are going to live within what is acceptable by the state or by the community standards. When you've got a real loud voice saying, we should change these community standards to be able to include be able to include marijuana use, people are going to start paying attention to that, and they're going to start to follow along with that as well. One of the things I always hear over and over is, well, I did it, and I turned out okay. I smoked marijuana, and I turned out okay, no problems with me. Well, okay, I'm 47 years old. I know, for some of you that doesn't sound so bad, for some others that's ancient. When I was growing up, we didn't have seatbelts in our cars. And when we did, how many people can recognize this? When you did have them, you never used them. And we can all look around and say, you know what, I've never used a seatbelt, and I'm okay. When I was young, there was no such thing as a bicycle helmet. They didn't exist. I rode bicycles for years without a helmet. I'm okay. So does it make sense that we should say, just because I turned out okay, just because I didn't get some sort of horrible problem from a risky behavior, then it should then be okay for the masses? No. Because it's going to be the individual that bears the brunt, that bears the weight of the problems that's going to be created in their lives. When, coming back to what the lady said, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Am I standing outside of your camera range? I'm sorry about that. I'm glad to see so many parents here tonight. Parents play a major role in prevention. It's not just the parents' responsibility. It's not all put on the parents, but parents play a major role. If you set your standards high for kids, kids will try to live up to them. If you set your standards low, kids will definitely live down to them. Part of what parents need to do is continuously have the conversation with your young people about your values, about why it's important to stay clean and sober, about the risks and dangers of not just marijuana, but everything out there. But I think marijuana in particular. It has to be the adult that brings it up, these kids won't. It has to be the adult that makes it a priority, and just to share your values and your hopes and dreams for what your kids are, and where they're going to go, and what their life is going to be like. I think a lot about coaches and parents. Coaches and parents. Parents, I think, should be more like coaches. A coach, when they're out there running practice and they're doing drills and stuff, they don't just look out at a player messing something up and say, well, it's probably just a phase. If I just leave him alone, he's going to be fine, and he's going to work his way through it. And it's just a normal thing. All wide receivers drop balls like that, so, I'm just going to let it go. No. Coaches pay attention. They watch everything that's going on. They monitor behavior. They pay attention to the steps that the people are taking, the kids are taking. And when something's wrong, they come in and they say, hey, you know what? Here's a better way. Try it this way. Do this. This is going to get you better results. So I encourage parents, be more like a coach. Pay attention. Be willing to step in there and say, hey, something needs to change. Something needs to be different. Don't be like a fan. What do fans do? They show up once a week, they sit in the audience, and they scream. Be a coach. Invest your time and your efforts with your kids, and really focus on perception of harm. And marijuana is harmful. That's part of the perception that we've lost in this country. What John Lennon called a harmless little giggle back in the 1960s is not a harmless little giggle. We heard earlier about the levels of THC going up. 9%, 11%, in some areas for the special stuff, 33% THC in marijuana. It's causing more and more problems. I'm still a chemical dependency counselor to this day. I am missing group tonight to be here. And let me tell you, I have a lot of clients in group that are having problems with marijuana. But it's funny, that perception still sticks with them. It's not a big deal. And part of getting healthy, I think, for the individual and the community is to realize it is a big deal. The community's job, get to know factual information. Get out there and actually research. Or better yet, get in touch with Chris Davis, because he's already done all the research, and find out the factual information about marijuana. That it's not a harmless little giggle. This is a dangerous drug. It alters people's perceptions, putting them in danger for addiction, and for getting into all kinds of trouble. It's also the community's norm to help set the standards of what the community is going to stand for. We can't be a passive, quiet majority. People need to speak up, take a stand, step beyond their own passivity, step beyond their own values, and look at what's important for the community and what's important for who? The kids that stood up in this room just a little while ago. When we look at marijuana, just a couple of little facts about marijuana. Marijuana is different from every other drug that we know. All the other drugs that we know are water soluble. They break down your body and they'll pass out through your body in a period of a day or two. Marijuana is different. It's what we call lipophilic. It doesn't break down in water. It actually sticks to fat cells. It will stick to fat cells a one-time use, depending on how much, what quality, how much the person weighs, etc., etc., etc. A one-time use can be detected positive up to a week later. Heavy users, we're seeing testing positive over 30 days after their last use with the urine drug screen. But that's not even getting into hair samples and all that other stuff. Marijuana sticks to fat cells. Your brain is about 1/3 fat. I'm not going to do the fathead joke tonight. Marijuana will actually change the way you think, feel, and behave even when you're not physically high. It changes our perceptions even when we're not physically high. Over a period of time, it's called subclinical intoxication. Even though the person isn't physically high at the time, they're still impacted by the marijuana that they've smoked already. We can also look at marijuana, a term called amotivational syndrome, where people just, I think the word says it itself, amotivational. They just give up. I had a friend in college, he was there for a while, smoked a lot of weed. In fact, we called him Weedy. That was his name. And he was in college for about a year and a half until he just absolutely flunked out. His favorite activity was to get high and look at a glass of soda, 7-Up, and watch the bubbles. That was entertainment for him. He didn't make it. When we look at marijuana, it interferes with learning. It interferes with short-term memory retention and problem-solving skills. What is it that our kids are relying on right now while they're in school? Memory retention and learning skills. In closing, isn't that always the best two words whenever you hear a speaker? In closing, the hardest thing that we can do is try to change somebody's attitudes. People get involved with a certain behavior and they start to normalize that within their life. If normal for me was to go home and drink a giant bottle of bourbon every night, then I would start thinking normal for everybody would be to do the same thing. And if I don't want to get DUIs, then I might go out and start trying to lobby to stop DUI checkpoints. We have to look beyond what we are doing to what is best for others, what is best for the community, what is best for the kids, and drug use isn't it. I want to say a special thank you to Chris Davis and his crew for having all of us up here. I want to say thank you to the board and to our moderator. Give him a round of applause, would you please? And thank you to all of you for coming out here tonight.
Thank you. Let's hear from Ron Griffin. Nicely done, sir. Okay, we're going to take just a short break, and that means you can talk amongst yourselves if you'd like. And we're going to gather up these questions, and we're going to begin the question and answer, which is where the real fun will begin, I'm sure. Some of them will be anyway, I'm sure. All right, so we'll figure out who's the best person to respond to this, or you can, we'll just have a free-for-all. What can a parent do if one of their child's friends are using drugs and alcohol? The student's 14 years old. Parents of the child refuse to believe the student is involved with drugs and alcohol. Might be a, yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me now? Okay. I always think better on my feet. I'm a teacher. There we go. If a friend of your child is using drugs, there's really not a whole lot you can do as far as, and help me out here if I'm wrong, anybody. There's really not a whole lot you can do because you don't have the control over that child. What you can do is set parameters to say, I don't want you hanging out with this boy when he's using. You can talk to that boy, assuming you have a relationship with him. I did hear boy, correct? Boy or girl? Child. You can talk to that child and let them know that options are out there. Give them support to let them know that you care for them, that you would like a better life for them. Options are out there and you can help them find it, to get treatment or whatever might help them along. But actually as far as being able to force anything to change with that child, you just don't have that authority. Does that go along pretty much with what we understand up here? I'm not just alone? Okay. Thank you.
Tough situation though, because obviously there are relationship dynamics involved, and particular age, you know, when you start even exerting your legitimate control and authority over your own child to, you know, it's the old psychological reaction that says, oh yeah, I can't see them, huh? They can't be my friend? Watch me. So it's a tough one. It's a very tough question. Does anybody else have any other thoughts about that? But certainly, I mean, one of the things we say in treatment is when you're trying to get clean, you change your playmates, playground, and playthings. And so relationships are terribly important. And so this person is very wise to be concerned about the dynamics as a friend. Next question. Since marijuana grows naturally, isn't it okay to smoke? Aren't cigarettes more harmful than marijuana? Oh, Ron's about to come out and say, you know, something apoplectic, pop a vein.
I love this question. There's lots of stuff that grows naturally that is not healthy for you. Smoking poison ivy, nightshade, hemlock, not good for you. Just because something is natural doesn't mean that it's good for you. If we look at the precursor, when we look at all the drugs that we have, ephedra comes from a root, cocaine comes from coca plants, heroin comes from poppies. I mean, we can trace all of that back to plants and nature. So the answer to that is a resounding no. That doesn't make it okay. It doesn't make it healthy. Just because Mother Nature put it out there doesn't mean it's good for you.
No, that's great. Anybody else want to talk about that? this master's in health nursing woman? She agrees. Yeah, if you're going to get poison naturally, right? I mean, all right, next question. Do you think the prohibition of natural cannabis has led to the creation of legal synthetic alternatives, which are often incredibly dangerous? Very thoughtful question. The hydraulic system. Anybody? Let me repeat the question for you. Do you think the prohibition of natural cannabis has led to the creation of legal, quote, synthetic alternatives, which are often incredibly dangerous? Going once, going twice, going around.
I don't want to just run the show, so I mean, feel free to jump in on any of these. When we look at the synthetics, the K2 and the K3 and Spice and all the ones that come along with that, they have a pretty specific niche market. When they first came out, couldn't be detected in drug screens. So for people that had to drop, like if you were on probation and parole and you had to drop urine for a screen, you're really prohibited from using a lot of drugs. And one of the big ones is marijuana, because it stays in your system so much longer than other chemicals. And so I don't think it was so much, and this is Ron's opinion here, I don't think it was so much the prohibition of marijuana that created that, but more people that wanted to get high on a marijuana type substance that couldn't do it because of legal issues, and it's causing them to resort to something else.
There's not a week that goes by that our officers don't encounter an individual under the influence of bath salts, and they can be very volatile and very dangerous.
Excellent example. All right, next question. Has anybody overdosed on, related to the earlier question, has anybody overdosed on marijuana? If not, why can't someone say, I used it and I'm fine?
No, to my knowledge, we have not come across our agency anybody who's overdosed on marijuana. Combination of the drugs, perhaps, but not solely attributed to marijuana.
I think that's it's sort of a matter of definitions as well. What is the definition of overdose? If any dose is toxic, then any dose would be an overdose technically, I suppose. But certainly, we know it's lipophilic. It binds with fat receptors. It binds with fat tissues. And it certainly can create very toxic levels of chemicals in the body. Ron, did you want to say something else?
Is it that easy?
It's just that easy.
It's just, you can just look at me and tell that I want to say something?
Yes.
I can't
Eat the mic. Just put it right there.
Eat the mic? Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Well, just because you don't overdose on it, just because you're not going to have a stroke on it or die from a heart attack from it, doesn't mean that that is safe. There's still a lot of people that get into trouble because they have perception changes, don't realize what they're doing, what they're getting into, the addiction to it. Just because you're not going to overdose and die like you would from an overdose of cocaine or opiates, doesn't mean that it's healthy.
Indeed. And overdose, of course, when we think of overdose, we think of an acute overdose that lands somebody in the ER or, in the ICU. But, you look at the studies of long-term, for example, neurocognitive effects of marijuana, and, it's just a slow-motion overdose. It's the way you can think of it. Next question. How can we eliminate marijuana use among high school students? That being said, are there any educational programs in high school to inform students about drug use consequences? I bet somebody knows the answer to that.
Well, yes, it is part of our curriculum. Yeah, you did turn it off, didn't you? It is part of our curriculum, and so we do have instruction, and it's required as part of our 9th grade health curriculum. But in other classes, they have instruction on where they have resources from the community who will come in and provide additional instruction on misuse. And the counselors also have a curriculum that they provide too. where they're going in and helping students with refusal techniques, self-esteem, those kinds of things. And then some of the counselors also have groups for students, so they lead groups with them. And they don't label them as this is our drug group or this is our drug prevention group, but kids who are having issues, and they'll bring them in and they'll talk and share about what's going on within their lives so that they can have, build some relationships and get them engaged. And I think it's the other important thing for parents is to make sure that they're assisting their child to be engaged and engaged in activities that the parents involved in as well, so they have better knowledge of who their friends are and what's going on with their student. The better engaged and attached the child is to the school district, the better engaged the parent is, the better outcome for the students.
Dr. Julie, Dr. Justin, you guys want to say anything about this question at all? Gene handled it pretty well. All right, next question. Very important question for many young folks in the audience for sure. How does marijuana affect athletic performance? I bet you have a lecture on this in your class, don't you, Ron?
No, I really don't have a lecture on this in my class, but I think we can start by talking about how it affects athletic performance. We don't have to look too far back into our history to Mizzou students, student athletes, football players. It affected their performance when they got caught smoking marijuana and were barred from playing. When we look at the impact of the marijuana smoke on the lungs, it's more harsh even than cigarette smoke, tobacco smoke. It has 2.5 times more tar, like I said earlier. So it will decrease the person's ability to be able to to be able to have the lung capacity to play at their fullest ability. It's also going to affect their ability to concentrate and focus on the game, to maintain that level of performance through practices and games. So yes, it will affect an athlete.
You bet. Absolutely. I mean, you'd think, based on what you hear from some people, that that marijuana is like multivitamins and breath mints. There's salutary effects on your health. Does anybody really believe that? I mean, does anybody seriously question whether breathing any kind of smoke into your lungs and repeatedly is good for you? Really? Okay. How would you respond to effective use of medicinal marijuana, where the side effects are much less than prescription medications used to treat the same medical issue? Anyone? Is your doctor in the house?
I think it's the delivery system or the delivery method, I think, is probably what's most questionable in terms of the medicinal perspectives that you hear. The FDA has, I believe, has approved a synthetic THC, Marinol. I don't know how often it's used or how effective it is, but it's FDA approved. So I think the fact that we have varying degrees of THC level in varieties of marijuana, and then to attempt to try to use it as medicine is probably the biggest challenge and probably one of the biggest problems the FDA has in trying to regulate it. I do know the DEA has, I think, 111 researchers actually dedicated to researching the cannabis and the THC and the marijuana derivatives for medicinal purposes. But at this point, I don't think they've been able to find a combination that would be FDA approved that would be suitable for medicinal use.
Thank you. Here's an interesting question that maybe many of us may have thought about. Do you really think scaring kids about marijuana early in their life will make them not use it? That just makes them more curious about it. Right? Ron? Right? John?
I think the idea is not so much to scare the kids. And actually, over time, research has proven that some of the straight stuff and scaring kids is not effective. What we need to do is be honest and approach our kids with factual information and let them know what our attitudes are about drug use. If you're a parent and you have a permissive attitude about marijuana use, your kid is going to be a lot more likely to use. So education is the important part, and scaring kids is not effective for anything.
You know, there's actually some very interesting social psychological research on this very question, not related to marijuana specifically, but related to health interventions in general. And that indicates that actually fear-based messages can be very effective in motivating behavior. In this case, it was a study regarding going and getting a vaccination. But yeah, there's an interesting correlation there, and that is with self-esteem. It takes a little while for people with high self-esteem after they receive a fear-based message to process that, but when they do, it actually has a significant effect on their likelihood of showing up to get that vaccination or whatever. So there actually is some evidence that, you know, I'm not a big fan of just scaring kids for no apparent reason, but sometimes when you share the facts, it's scary. And you know, that's the bottom line. So, next question. And this probably will need to go to Dr. Harrell or Dr. Julie. Has Springfield Public Schools considered drug testing, number one, and why is assessment not required by Springfield Public Schools?
I'm assuming we're talking about random drug testing?
Doesn't say that. Sounds like
Yes, there have been ongoing conversations about random drug testing. The question, we're dealing with a district our size, we're looking for exactly what are you testing for. Do you test all students? Do you test athletes? That always comes up into the conversations. And has that proven to inhibit use over the fear of possible test? And most of the research, honestly, right now does not indicate that there's a huge decline unless you are randomly testing the entire population, and everyone in that population may in fact get tested. At some point, there's not been a whole lot of research saying this is really stopping it. But on the flip side of it, if it helped with anyone, is it important? Absolutely. So have there been conversations or ongoing conversations? There's philosophy on both sides of it. We've not moved in one direction at all, or one way or the other as far as the school at this point. I hope that answers the question.
Thank you very much. We've got about 5 minutes left for questions, and this one could take all night, but let's wade into it. If we were in a different location, such as California, would we still be having this conversation? Being in the Bible Belt is our biggest issue, perhaps, it says. Is there a can of worms? Is it a cultural thing related to being in the clasp of the buckle of the Bible Belt where we live? Or is this a conversation that is going on across the country?
How about it, man? It's you. I don't want to jump in and not give anybody else a chance here. But apparently I have an opinion on everything. California is a very liberal and very outgoing liberal state. If we were living in California right now, there would be different conversations that we would be having. But the fact of the matter is, we're living here in Missouri. And this is where our conversation is right now. Every state is dealing with this issue right now. And every state is dealing with it in their own way. Some are looking at medicalization. Some are actually starting to talk about legalization. So every state is having this conversation. It just so happens this state is having this conversation right now.
Indeed. I would just say that I think the premise of the question is a bit flawed, because it presumes that you have to be in some way, that maybe it's only Christians who believe that marijuana ought to be against the law and is harmful or whatever. Certainly that's not true. There's a lot of people of all kinds of different faiths, and no faith at all, who believe that marijuana is very harmful because they've read the literature. They've been convinced by the facts, in my sometimes humble opinion. All right, so the last question really is for each of you, and that is, if there's one thing you want people to take home or remember from tonight, what would that be? We start with Major Kirk Manlow.
Well, I'd say that, focus what decisions you've made and how that impacts your children. I am glad the doctor recognized our youth here tonight, and if nothing more, I think what we have said tonight, hopefully, they'll leave here with some good information. And so I think that's what I would like to take away from tonight's forum, is that our youth tonight learned a thing or two. I know I did, and I'm glad you all came as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Major. Brad Shelton, one thing would you like the folks to take home?
One thing I would say is just encouragement. Talk with your kids. When somebody comes down to the office, a lot of times they don't see that encouragement right out of the gate. But when we get into something, we want to see people succeed. We want to see kids be healthy. So I think just encouraging your kids, and if you see an issue, address it. Just don't let it go.
Very good. Jean Graybill, what do you want them to take home tonight?
I would say start the conversation now with your kids. You be the ones to talk to your children. Get that conversation going and don't stop. Don't just think because they're in high school that you don't need to talk to them anymore. Continue to talk with them.
Very good, indeed. John Birch.
I guess I just have to reiterate what everybody else has been saying. I think as a society, as parents, we need to be involved with our kids' lives as much as possible. Even one of the other questions that was raised earlier about how do you prevent your kid from, if you have a friend, if your kid has a friend that's using, you invite that kid over. I mean, you have, when they have get-togethers, it's at your house. You make yourself known to that kid. They're not probably going to want to be around you if you're asking them questions and you're finding out more about their lives. Be involved with your kids' lives. Know what they're doing. Know what they're looking at on the internet. And know who those friends are. That's the very most important thing I think that we can pass on to anybody.
Thank you, John. And finally, Ron Griffin.
And this is the last thing I'll say, and then I'll be quiet. The message I bring tonight is not just an anti-marijuana message, it's a pro-health message. There are things that will advance people and get them closer to getting their needs met, getting their goals and their dreams met, and there are things that will get them further away. This is about focusing on what gets people healthy and keeps them healthy so that they can have pleasant, productive lives.
Thank you kindly. And thanks, let's hear it for this panel. Remarks this evening. Please, if you would, complete that post survey that you were handed when you came into the building and place it in the box on the resource table in the hallway. I want to say thank you again to all of our panelists and volunteers, everyone who made tonight possible, members of the Ozarks Fighting Back Advisory Board and CPO Board of Directors for volunteering tonight. Springfield Public Schools, certainly for use of facility, equipment, participating on the panel, student and staff support for this wonderful use of this auditorium. Springfield Police Department for participating on the panel, Greene County Juvenile Office, also Rural Behavioral Health, Mr. Ron Griffin for coming all the way down from Kansas City to be our keynote, and everyone who showed up tonight, you all in the audience, whether you agree with the opinions expressed or not, thank you very much for being here, and go home safely.